I would like to start my talk on the future of education by looking at a perspective that is typically ignored from a group of people who have no voice in the matter, and that's the children. So what does education mean to children? They start out in this wondrous adventure called life, full of sights and sounds and everything's new and exciting. For years they play and laugh, and learning comes as natural to them as breathing. They learn to walk, talk, make sense of the world, and generally learn how to get what they need, all without formalized instruction. Then, around 5 years old, grown-ups begin to assume that the children no longer have the ability to learn unless they have a certified teacher to teach them. Without even thinking about if it makes sense, most parents take what they hold most precious in life, their children, and hand them over to the government to be educated, because they believe that's what people do. They went to school, their parents went to school, and it's now time for their children to go. For most kids, everything starts out great in kindergarten. They make friends, and they generally have fun. Cheery, compassionate teachers make the children feel like they are important and cared for while they learn through play each day with their friends. But then they move into first grade, and suddenly the room is full of rows of desks. The tables with the fun activities are shoved to the back of the room, or they disappear completely, and the fun playtime called school becomes something very different. Learning has now become the child's job. It is their duty to sit still for many hours each day and get educated. The idea of learning being fun is quickly replaced with learning is work and is not supposed to be enjoyed. Now, instead of feeling that giddy excitement from the pure joy of learning, like when they first learned to tie their shoes, children are taught to strive for gold stars, smiley faces, and or good grades. At that moment, they've been robbed of their joy of learning and have been programmed to look outside themselves for acceptance and praise until a great part of their self-worth is dictated by their report card. A single piece of paper that contains arbitrarily determined conclusions about the intellect of a child by someone who can't possibly take the time necessary to recognize or understand each child's real abilities. So what else do children learn during those formative years? They learn that what they want and care about is irrelevant. They learn that they absolutely must conform and do exactly what everyone else is doing, or they will be promptly and sometimes severely punished. They are taught that they are never to question what the teacher tells them and just blindly accept everything being said as fact. Feelings of shame and pride become the primary motivating factors in their lives. They learn that anyone younger than themselves is irrelevant and should be ignored, and anyone older is to be envied and feared. They are taught exactly what to think and rarely, if ever, how to think. For most children, it takes only about a year, sometimes two, for the wide-eyed anticipation of a grand adventure and the squealing joy of discovery to be replaced by sadness, boredom, fear, anger, anxiety, and a severely diminished desire to learn anything. Once they realize that they have no control over their lives and no power to change anything, that's when the coping mechanisms develop. It starts with kids becoming bullies, social cliques form, and class clowns appear. Over the years, this grows to general defiance, substance abuse, promiscuity, gangs, more severe violence, and many times suicide. But what do we expect when we incarcerate these children? We give them no say whatsoever as to what they can do or even think in a system that was designed to break their spirit of individuality by demanding conformity through the use of standardized tests that measure nothing more than a child's ability to regurgitate data that has little or no relevance to their lives. To make matters worse, it has been clearly established that 80% of the 13 years that a child spends being schooled is wasted on classroom administration, disciplinary actions, and other activities that have nothing to do at all with education. That's over 10 years wasted, which is especially appalling when you understand that numerous studies have shown that when a child wants to learn, it generally takes just around 100 hours for that child to learn how to read, write, and do basic math. Yet the Department of Education's own records show that 19% of high school graduates, not dropouts, graduates, after 13 years of schooling, cannot read their own diplomas. But failing to teach nearly 10 million publicly schooled children just 100 hours worth of basic skills over 13 years is not even the most shocking part about public education. The most alarming part is that out of the 50 million children in public schools, over 30 million of them, that's 60%, will experience firsthand real exposure to violence, either as a victim or a witness, the long-lasting effects of which we are just now coming to fully understand. Furthermore, at least 8 million of those children, or nearly 16%, will be sexually abused at some time during their 13 years at school. Another 8 million children are being coerced into taking dangerous mind-altering drugs for not paying attention in class or for conditions like ADD or ADHD that are actually most often diet and allergy issues that need no medications. Over 10 million students ages 12 to 17 either smoke, drink, or do drugs during school, and over 4 million children will attempt suicide, with enough succeeding to make it the third leading cause of death for 15 to 24-year-olds. The list continues, but it's clearly the children who are paying the price for a society where public schooling that is actually just taxpayer-funded daycare is more important to parents than the mental, emotional, and often physical well-being of their own children. I believe that 100 years from now, people are going to look at the days of compulsory schooling as the dark ages of education, a time which started in the 1890s when children being forcibly taken from their parents by militia, a time when children were treated not as people but as product to be programmed, packaged, and delivered into the workplace to serve bosses who would determine when and where they would work and how much they would make. A roughly 100-year period where bureaucrats proclaimed decade after decade that new research and new findings were providing better and better ways to educate the masses, and the new refined curriculum and teaching techniques would allow for the American children to become smarter and smarter as they progressed through the system. Except exactly the opposite happened. The children and ultimately the general population statistically have intellectually fallen farther behind where people were at 100 years ago. In general, people have become less able to think critically, discern propaganda from truth, or even do basic problem solving. However, the good news is that experts have finally figured out the workings of children's minds well enough to know exactly what they need in order to learn best. We know, for instance, that real learning takes place when a child is interested in the subject matter and sees a relevance to their life, is having fun and is with someone that they respect and care about and who cares about them, is rested, in control, and safe, is not being coerced, bribed, or forced, is presented information in a manner best suited to their learning style, like visually, audibly, or kinesthetically, and feels comfortable that they can make a mistake without fear of punishment or humiliation. We also know that none of this is even possible in the public school system due to their very structure. For the most part, the public school system is exactly the opposite of what it needs to be for real learning to take place, even though there are many incredible teachers that do their best to help the children in spite of the system. Great teachers and education reform experts are coming up with new ideas every day that are helping children to overcome some of these problems. But the unfortunate reality is that these efforts are like treating cancer with pain relievers. The patient feels better, but the cancer continues growing. We have to deal with the source of the problem directly, which is the public school system itself. You see, the education system was fundamentally and intentionally flawed from the beginning, and now, in the age of the internet, our 100-year-old assembly line education system has to be scrapped completely and replaced with something that will let our children learn to think critically, find their passions, be creative, explore the world in their own ways, and learn on their own terms while being allowed to take some responsibility for their own lives. But the fact of the matter is that nothing is going to change until we have a better option. Well, I'm here today to share with you one such better option. Generally speaking, it was here before the dark ages of education began and became legal again in all 50 states about 20 years ago. But it has been ignored by a large portion of our society. I'm talking about the 21st century version of homeschooling with support from what I call self-directed learning centers. As someone who has homeschooled 3 children for over 18 years and as the founder of America's only national all-inclusive homeschool organization, I know that at the moment that I said homeschool, a great many of you began thinking of reasons why you don't think homeschooling would work for you, in spite of what you now know about public schools. Let's look at a few of the common misconceptions about homeschooling, starting with, I'm not smart enough to teach my kids. First, studies have repeatedly shown that there is no correlation between the education level of the parents and the academic performance of the children. Homeschool children of high school dropout parents perform academically just as well as children of PhDs. Homeschoolers across the board consistently score 15 to 30% better than their public school counterparts. This is huge because it shows that amateur, untrained parents are consistently getting better results than college-trained and licensed teachers. This is, of course, due primarily to all the reasons mentioned earlier on why children learn best and has little or nothing to do with the teachers themselves. In fact, many parents with teaching degrees that turn to homeschooling discover that they have to unlearn much of what they were taught in college in order to get out of their children's way to let them teach themselves. This is because once a child learns the basics and learns how to learn, they typically need very little help from that point on. With information of all kinds now available instantly on the internet, including free classes on just about every subject, parents being smart enough is no longer a concern. Now, how about I can't afford it? Well, the average homeschool family spends about $600 per year on supplies, field trips, and, of course, pajamas. Some families, however, spend virtually nothing, as public libraries and internet sites provide everything that they need. As for public schools, aside from the $619 billion, or roughly $12,000 per student that we are all being taxed yearly to support, a large percentage of parents are spending hundreds of additional dollars yearly to cover fees, transportation costs, special wardrobe needs, and mandated supplies. For individual families and society as a whole, homeschooling is by far more affordable. Then there's the biggest misconception: we both work, or I'm a single parent and there isn't enough time. First of all, if you're like a lot of parents who spend at least an hour a day helping their children with homework, then you're already providing them more one-on-one individualized attention than they get all week at school, and you're already doing homeschooling, except your efforts are largely wasted on things that your child is most often not interested in. That same time spent on things that they want to learn produces incredible results. In reality, saying there isn't enough time is really, my children need daycare while I'm at work. Well, there are many good solutions to this. One answer that some use very effectively is to simply start a home-based business so that childcare is not needed. Another answer that works very well for some is the creation of pods, parent-organized discovery sites. Here's how they work. 5 or more homeschool families get together and work it out so that the kids of these families all go to the home of one of the parents on Mondays, who has that day off. The parent is responsible to help find answers to any questions that the kids might have and make sure that the kids are safe, happy, and fed while doing what they can to inspire them to want to learn more. If that parent has a special talent, then he or she can offer to tutor those that are interested in that talent. Then on Tuesdays, the kids all go to a different parent's house that has that day off. This repeats through the 5 days of the week, just as it would for a normal school week. The kids get to socialize with other kids of all ages. They get to spend their days learning whatever is of interest to them, and the parents can go to work full-time knowing that their child is safe, happy, and learning for the joy of learning at their own pace and in their own way. Then there's the excuse, I don't want people to think I'm some kind of a fanatic. Currently, the number one reason that people homeschool is because that they believe they can provide a higher quality and more effective education for their children at home. Other primary reasons include concerns about their child's safety and objections to what's being taught at school. Millions of children are now being homeschooled, and while the media still likes to highlight fanatics in every walk of life, homeschools have become as mainstream as private schools. Finally, I don't want my kids to be socially awkward. I love this one because when most homeschool parents are asked, "Aren't you concerned about socialization?" they typically say, "Yes, I am, and that's exactly why I homeschool." Let's be honest. There's very little about the social environment of public schools that relates in any way to real life, except for what people experience in prison. But if you've ever witnessed a group of typical public school kids of any age group and compared them to a typical homeschool group of similar age, you'll almost immediately see why socialization shouldn't even rank as a concern. The fact is that all kids were homeschooled for centuries before the advent of compulsory education, and homeschooling has now been legal again for over 20 years. So every child in the public school system today is there because their parent chose to put them there, in spite of the fact that statistically homeschooled children are smarter, happier, physically and psychologically healthier, have higher self-esteem, feel safer, are more independent, more mature, more polite, and can better socialize with people who are not their own age than their public school counterparts. Parents feel that homeschooling allows them to feel more fulfilled, have closer relationships with their children, feel that they have more freedom, and are proud that they have taken full responsibility for raising their own children rather than letting the government be involved. There are, however, two reasons why homeschooling has been unable to replace the public schools so far. One is the unfortunate reality that there are some parents out there that simply cannot and should not homeschool under any circumstances. And the other is that the public schools provide people with a sense of belonging and community that keeps parents locked into the system. Today, however, is a new day, and self-directed learning centers, let's call them SDLCs, represent my vision of the future of education that will finally allow for public schools to be replaced entirely. SDLCs will be facilities where all homeschool families and PODS groups will be able to go to maintain that sense of community and make use of the facilities to accommodate their child's individualized learning paths. The facilities would include science labs, gymnasiums, and theaters, etc., that might not be readily available to homeschoolers. Innovative concepts like studio schools and entrepreneur boot camps and others will be incorporated into the SDLC's day-to-day functioning. Hands-on classes will be available for anyone to take on a voluntary basis from both regular volunteers and guest presenters. Those seeking mentors or tutors would be matched up with those who are interested in helping to nurture a child's passion in a given area of interest. The SDLCs will also have a section that will function somewhat like homeschooling camps or democratic schools for the children that simply cannot be homeschooled. Mentors would help children to design self-directed and project-based learning activities that would be of particular interest to them. Real-life activities would be incorporated that would ultimately help them to develop the skills necessary to become what they aspire to be on their timelines and using the learning methods most suited to them. A pilot SDLC is being developed now. It is designed to be nonprofit, yet financially self-sufficient, while still being free to those who use it. Its widely replicated success would save taxpayers over $500 billion a year and would solve virtually all of the problems discussed at the beginning of this talk. Right now, there are already nearly 600,000 children that switch to homeschooling every year. It's perfectly legal, and it costs nothing to make the switch. We have the power to fix this right now. No protests are necessary. No congressional action is required. Starting tomorrow, one by one, virtually every family could quietly start homeschooling, and before too long, self-directed learning centers would spring up everywhere, replacing the public schools and officially ending the dark age of education, thus providing a much brighter future for us all. Thank you.